Let us today talk about yoga. When we say the word yoga, usually people feel that it is a set of asanas or bodily postures, but the term yoga is much more than that. Where does the word yoga come from? Living with a deep and permanent sense of well being, along with finding freedom from suffering, can seem like an unachievable goal. However, this is the promise of yoga if we are willing to sincerely walk on the path of yoga in its complete form. In recent times, yoga is often perceived as synonymous with a combination of asanas, which are bodily postures, and pranayama, which are breathing exercises, along with the inclusion of meditation. Nevertheless, that has not been the meaning of yoga as explained over the centuries in the Indian civilization, where it is a set of practices to access higher consciousness and higher states of being. Yoga literally means to yoke, from the Sanskrit root yuj, which means to join and refers to experiencing oneness with the supreme consciousness. The Encyclopedia of Indian Philosophies defines yoga in two ways. First, yoga means all those techniques people practice to find release from their existential suffering and achieve consciousness. Second, yoga refers to a specific school of Indian philosophy given by Patanjali in his text Yoga Sutra. To fully appreciate role in positive mental health, we need to explore yoga deeply, also its aims and related assumptions. One of the core assumptions is related to the how the world is made of not just matter but has underlying consciousness. Based on this idea, yogic practices aim towards experiencing pure consciousness or some similar higher state considered as liberation in specific yogic system. A variety of terms have been used for such liberated states like Kaivalya, Mukti, etc. This liberation is not a transitory state experienced only during deep meditation, but a complete transformation of one's ordinary living, working, and relating to others. The three major yogic paths or three marga of bhakti, jnana, and karma yoga is a standard method to categorize these multiple styles and systems. Bhakti Yoga, the yogic path of bhakti, focuses on the cultivation of emotions around the divine and supposedly result in bliss when one achieves oneness with one's preferred form of God. Jnana Yoga is that of cognitive realization of the oneness of consciousness, which may later be experienced firsthand and experientially. And Karma Yoga, described in the Bhagavad Gita, is associated with the proper use of one's willpower. It, it asks us to work without any desires, nishkam karma, and not being attached to specific outcomes, thereby finding inner freedom. Most people do not practice the yogic paths in isolated manner. They may mix components with some or other aspect being dominant. To understand yoga is to understand Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. The term Yoga Sutra, as codified by Patanjali, is a millennia old text from India, and evidence from archaeology, various other texts, and oral tradition indicate that this yogic system is probably more than 5,000 years old. It describes yoga philosophy, steps, and outcomes, and has many ancient and modern commentaries written on it. There are 195 Sanskrit verses or sutras in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, categorized in four chapters or pada to explain profound ideas in the philosophy of mind and its application. While yoga means union, sutra denotes thread and formula both. Thus, Yoga Sutra may mean the thread of formulas codifying methods to achieve union with the highest consciousness. What are the four chapters of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra? The four chapters of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra are Samadhipada, which is the first chapter. It discusses the definition of yoga as the stilling of five types of activities of mind and identifying with deeper awareness. This process occurs through a disciplined effort and detachment. It further discusses various types and levels of samadhi, which is a deep absorptive state. Some essential aids on this path are faith, courage, and memory. This was the first chapter called the Samadhi Pada. The second chapter of Yoga Sutra is Sadhana Pada. The Sadhana Pada discusses Kriya Yoga, a combination of self study, disciplined endurance, and surrender to the supreme consciousness. This process of Kriya Yoga is meant to remove five afflictions or klesh and gradually get freedom from the laws of action reaction, which is karma. The third chapter, Vibhuti Pada, discusses the last three steps of Ashtanga Yoga: Dharana, Dhyan, and Samadhi. When these are practiced together, it is called as Sanyama. As per Patanjali, extraordinary knowledge and powers may be gained through Sanyama. The usefulness of Vairagya and need for purification of mind is also emphasized in this chapter. And the last chapter is Kaivalya Pada, where the state of liberation or Kaivalya is discussed in detail, along with law of karma, rebirth, gun, ordinary perception versus higher discrimination is also discussed. These were the four chapters of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra begins by providing a definition of yoga as the process of silencing the mind by stopping the waves of mental activities known as chitta vrittis. After silencing our mind, the next step with a calm and silent mind is constant practice, detachment, courage and strength, inculcating memory and learning, and also having faith. However, there are also barriers in the yogic practice which must be avoided. The barriers can be illness, dullness, doubt, distraction, laziness, desire, craving, etc. These barriers have to be overcome. The term Ishwar or divine also has a place in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. The special soul, Vishesh Purush, is described as the Ishwar, which is beyond klesh and the laws of reaction, that is karma, and is the timeless source of wisdom which can guide us as our eternal teacher. One of the important models on psychological causes of suffering, as presented by Patanjali, is the following 5 core afflictions or klesh. The first is avidya, which is the primary ignorance of our true self, and it is described to be an error where one believes the non-eternal to be everlasting. Second is asmita, which is developed next when one misunderstands our mind to be our true self. The third klesh is rag, which is the attachment to pleasure. The fourth klesh is dvesh, which is aversion to pain. And the fifth klesh is abhinivesh, the desire for living and fear of death. That is the fifth klesh. To overcome these afflictions and avoid future suffering, one needs to realize the true self as separate from the material world, made up of triguna. We have to overcome these trigunas and become trigunatit. That is the practice of Kriya Yoga. The most famous contribution of Patanjali is his comprehensive system of Ashtanga Yoga or the 8-limb path. It not only purifies the mind but also helps in experiencing the state of deepest absorption or samadhi. These 8 limbs are further categorized into external Bahiranga Yoga and internal Antaranga Yoga, depending on the focus of these practices. Bahiranga Yoga consists of Yam, Niyam, Asana and Pranayam. The fifth limb, Pratyahar, although grouped with Bahiranga, is a bridge with the Antaranga components of Ashtanga Yoga. Antaranga component consists of Dharana, Dhyan and Samadhi. The first limb of Ashtanga Yoga is Yamas. The 5 Yamas emphasize ethics in one's relations to the outer world, not only in actions but also in speech and thoughts. These Yamas are non-harming, which is Ahimsa, truthfulness, which is Satya, non-stealing, which is Asteya, following the highest truth, Brahmacharya, and non-possessiveness, which is Aparigraha. The second phase or second limb of Ashtanga Yoga is Niyamas. The 5 Niyamas are focused on our relationship to ourselves. These are first, purity of body and mind, which is Shaucha, contentment, which is Santosh, highest discipline, which is Tapa, study and analysis of oneself, called Swadhyay, and surrender to the divine, which is Ishwar Pranidhan. This was the second limb called as Niyamas. The third limb of Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga is Asana. The first 2 limbs of Yam and Niyam are foundations of the practice, and when they are consistently practiced beyond consideration for individual and contextual variations like place and time and family lineage, these can become the great vows or Mahavrat. Special powers and capacities may develop when any of these Yamas or Niyamas are established within a person as a great vow through unwavering practice. The last 3 Niyamas of Tap, Swadhyaya and Ishwar Pranidhan is also known as Kriya Yoga and can remove the 5 afflictions or klesh. As per Patanjali, even merely practice of last niyam, Ishwar Pranidhan, can lead to the highest samadhis. The third limb is asana. Asana is described as that which leads to comfortable stability. When asana is practiced meditatively without efforts, one can experience equanimity and non-duality. Usually, in common parlance, when we say yoga, we are actually describing asana. But asana, as you can see, is just one of the limbs of Ashtanga Yoga. The fourth limb is pranayam. Pranayama is described as the stopping of inhalation and exhalation, which can improve attention and prepare the mind for advanced yoga. A few types of pranayam are discussed, accompanying with how the process can be influenced by factors like location or season. Although the components of asana pranayam are most emphasized in the modern world, one may notice that Patanjali has not emphasized so much on them. The fifth limb is pratyahara. Pratyahara is disengaging and withdrawing one's mind from the external sensory objects of attention. Just like a tortoise withdraws all its organs, its limbs into its shell, one must disengage all the senses from the external material objects of pleasure. That stage is called as Pratyahara. It is the foundation stage on which the dharana and dhyan are to be built. The next limb of Ashtanga Yoga is dharana. For dharana to happen, pratyahar is a prerequisite. Dharana is the act of holding attention to a single object or point. That stage is called as dharana. After dharana stage is achieved, comes the next stage called dhyan. Dhyan is the one pointed attention of dharana, and when this one pointed attention becomes steady and unbroken, it is called as dhyan. And when a person goes into dhyan, ultimately he reaches the state of samadhi, which is the eighth limb of Ashtanga Yoga. Samadhi is the state of deep absorption where only the object of attention is left and not the mind. Even the mind ceases to exist. This stage is known as samadhi. Usually, the object of attention is the divine consciousness or Om or God. When the limbs of dharana, dhyan, and samadhi are practiced together, it is known as Sayyama. The practice of Sayyama on various objects or ideas can bring in a variety of knowledge and powers as described in the Yoga Sutras. This was the Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali, Maharshi Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. The practice of this in today's modern world can relieve a person from a great deal of stress and give him the courage and power to face the suffering of everyday life. Thank you so much for listening.